Before the world attached Jennifer Hudson's name to unimaginable tragedy, before news anchors rehearsed the timeline and courtroom analysts traced bullet paths across diagrams, there was a family that had spent years trying to outrun the shadow of one man, and that man, William Balfour, didn't arrive at their doorstep with sudden rage. He arrived slowly, in fragments, long before the murders made headlines. It began with patterns Jennifer saw, patterns Julia tried to excuse, patterns their mother sensed in the uneasy silence that filled the room whenever his name came up. Balfour wasn't an accident in their lives. He was a warning the family felt but could never fully escape. He carried a history carved out by violence, jealousy, and incarceration, a history Jennifer had always distrusted, long before the rest of the world learned his name. He had already lived nearly 7 years inside a prison cell for crimes steeped in aggression, attempted murder, carjacking, and possession of a stolen vehicle. The street had shaped his instincts long before he entered the Hudson family, and those instincts didn't soften just because he found his way into a marriage certificate. Julia Hudson, Jennifer's sister, had married him in 2006, at a time when she still believed she could love the danger out of a dangerous man. She saw pieces of potential where Jennifer saw warning signs. She heard promises where others heard threats. It is often the people closest to the flame who mistake heat for safety, and while the marriage unraveled quickly, Balfour's grip on her didn't. He wasn't the type to let go just because a relationship had collapsed. He was the type to see separation as betrayal, an unforgivable offense that needed consequence. By early 2008, they had separated, but separation did not free Julia. It provoked him, and it was jealousy. Not the soft jealousy of heartbreak, but the sharp, suffocating kind fueled by ownership that drove the narrative toward its breaking point. Witnesses would later recount how he threatened Julia again and again, telling her in chilling specificity that he would kill her family first and save her for last. These weren't empty threats whispered in the heat of an argument. They were declarations of intent, spoken like dark oaths meant to instill fear and obedience. And the Hudson family lived with that cloud gathering overhead. Their home remained warm, filled with music, laughter, and the childlike wisdom of 7-year-old Julian King. But beneath that warmth was the uneasy silence that comes from knowing someone unpredictable has memorized the layout of your life. Jennifer, who by 2008 had already climbed from American Idol rejection to Academy Award triumph, still grounded herself in family. They were her sanctuary. They were the people who protected her long before the world celebrated her. She had moved out, built a life, found success, but she carried worry for Julia like a quiet bruise. Because the truth is this: Jennifer didn't just dislike Balfour. She feared the path he could take. She feared the instability that shimmered behind his smile. She feared the rage she knew lived inside him, even when he hadn't yet unleashed it. And she was right. Everything that happened on October 24, 2008, began long before that day. It didn't start with a gun. It didn't start with a break-in. It didn't start with the sound of a car engine pulling up outside the home. It began with jealousy disguised as love. It began with control disguised as commitment. It began with a man who believed losing a woman meant losing himself. And when a man like that decides he has nothing left to lose, the most devastating chapters write themselves before anyone has time to intervene. When the case finally reached the courtroom in 2012, Chicago felt less like a city attending a trial, and more like a community collectively holding its breath. This was no ordinary prosecution. It wasn't just about proving guilt. It was about reconstructing the final hours of 3 lives stolen with ruthless precision, and the unraveling of an entire family left to rebuild themselves from ashes. And at the center of it all, carrying a grief so profound it became mythic, was Jennifer Hudson. From the moment the trial began, the courtroom was saturated with a tension that even seasoned reporters described as heavy enough to change the temperature of the room. The prosecution's task was enormous: connect Balfour to 3 murders committed in rapid succession, with no surviving eyewitnesses except the killer himself. But the evidence, once laid out piece by piece, painted a narrative as chilling as any ever presented in Cook County's criminal courts. Prosecutors began by meticulously tracing Balfour's movements. They established the timeline using security footage, witness testimony, and phone records that placed him near the Hudson home at the exact windows of time the murders occurred. They introduced the threats, those terrifying repeated declarations that he would kill her family first, not as emotional daggers, but as premeditative markers. And they brought in the key testimony of Balfour's then-girlfriend, who recounted his confessions, small but damning, delivered not with remorse, but with a warped sense of inevitability. The evidence became a tapestry of obsession. Gunshot residue found on his clothing, cell tower pings from the SUV he stole with Julian inside, forensic matching of shell casings from the crime scenes, witnesses who saw him lurking the neighborhood that morning, testimony placing him with the murder weapon shortly after the killings. Each piece, isolated, was troubling. Together, they were suffocating. And yet, even with every fact pointing in one direction, the courtroom remained engulfed by something deeper, an emotional gravity that could not be quantified by evidence alone. Because sitting quietly in the gallery each day, in the same seat, with the same rigid posture, was Jennifer Hudson. She never made a spectacle of her grief. She didn't cry loudly or seek softness from the journalists lined like vultures outside the courthouse. Instead, she carried her devastation like armor. When she finally took the stand, the room held stillness, so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. She spoke not as a celebrity, but as a daughter, a sister, a woman who had flown home to identify the bodies of her mother and brother, and then waited days to learn the fate of a 7-year-old nephew she adored. Her voice remained steady, an astonishing act of discipline, given the memories she was forced to relive. She described the household routine, her family's relationships, and her long-standing distrust of Balfour, a man she had never wanted near them. Her testimony wasn't filled with dramatic revelations. It didn't need to be. Her presence alone tore through whatever remained of the defendant's humanity, because her pain was the prosecution's closing argument, what they fought to make the jury see, not as celebrity tragedy, but as human devastation caused by a single man's violent entitlement. The defense attempted to craft an alternative universe, one in which Balfour was a victim of circumstance, a man framed by timing and coincidence. They argued the possibility of another unknown assailant, hinted at strained family dynamics, and tried to detach Balfour from the SUV in which Julian's body was found. But the arguments collapsed under the weight of the evidence and the unmistakable pattern of rage and control that prosecutors laid bare. As the trial progressed, the city watched as if absorbing each detail could somehow lighten the weight Jennifer carried. But her posture never broke. She did not look at Balfour. She did not acknowledge him. And he never looked at her. Not once, choosing instead to fidget, whisper and stare at the table, refusing to meet the gaze of the woman whose life he had shattered. When closing arguments came, the prosecution didn't rely on theatrics. They simply reconstructed the truth. 3 murders, each committed with calculation, a child executed to eliminate a witness, a man driven not by insanity, but by entitlement and rage. And when the jury left to deliberate, it felt as though the entire building exhaled for the first time in weeks. They returned with the verdict swiftly, guilty on all counts. Balfour showed no emotion. Jennifer wept silently, the tears she had denied the courtroom finally breaking through. The sentence was unequivocal: 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. In the eyes of the law, justice had been served, but for Jennifer, justice would never be synonymous with healing. The courtroom had delivered closure, but not restoration. No verdict could restore the family she lost. No prison term could return the life she once knew. The trial ended, but the echo of what happened inside that home in 2008 would follow her forever.
Retro.